Okay, I think we're going to get started, and I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Daphne Hurling. I'm a member of the evolving grassroots group, Friends of Lolo Peak. And before we get into the program, I want to spend a couple of minutes, and I want everyone to imagine that you're standing in the valley on a beautiful, clear winter morning, something like we had this morning. And as you're looking up at the North Peak, the sun is just beginning to come over the western mountains, and the first rays of the sun hit North Peak. And that glorious, magnificent glow of what we know as Lolo Peak shines down on us. I know I have been stopped short by that indescribable beauty, and I'm sure we all have also. And it also makes me realize that it's a very good reason for why Lolo Peak has such spiritual significance to Montana's first people. So with that image firmly in our minds, we're here tonight to be clear about how what is billed as potentially the largest ski resort in the U.S. might impact so much of what we hold dear, our untrammeled lands, and our quality of life with its emphasis on local community values. Friends of Lolo Peak sort of organically started when some of us began talking to each other about the proposed ski resort. We felt that some of the important issues weren't being addressed. We heard people saying how this has been talked about before in the 60s and the 80s, and it didn't happen then and it won't happen now. But believe me, this is a very different proposal than the one that came about in the 60s and the 80s. So we started doing some research on many of the issues, and we found that some very important information in this public dialogue about how we use our public lands, and thus we organize this meeting. Our mission statement is very simple. It reads, Friends of Lolo Peak is a citizens group of local residents and businesses, hikers, hunters, anglers, and skiers dedicated to protecting the outstanding natural integrity, scenic values, and traditional uses of the Lolo Peak area for future generations. We want to make it very clear that we're not against skiing. Many of us are skiers. We are not against economic development or development of private land. We believe passionately in the democratic public dialogue in which Mr. McClay and his team of consultants are embarking. What are we for? We're for the continued use of Lolo Peak by all the people of Montana, for the local anglers and hunters who have supported and honored the wildlife and its habitat, for the backcountry skiers who hike up the slopes spending only their hard-earned sweat and not 50, 60, 70, 80 bucks for lift tickets, for cross-country skiers who can't wait for Mormon Peak Road to open each year so they can enjoy the quiet, undeveloped trails, for the backpackers who can make it up to Carlton Lake in an afternoon after a day's work, for the summer hikers who can enjoy the stunning vistas of the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness without having to walk past ski lifts, towers, and restaurants. And finally, and probably most importantly, we're for the dialogue about how this type of ski real estate development might impact and change our quality of life. A dialogue that must include all the local citizens of the Missoula and Bitterroot valleys who may never recreate on Lolo Peak, but who live, work, raise their children, go to church, and work hard in the valleys, because they love this way of life. We want to get everyone asking the question, how far down the road of developing our public lands do we want to go before it is too late to turn back and the reasons we love the valleys are gone forever? We have a very full agenda tonight, so I'd appreciate your help and patience to be sure that we can get through all the presentations before we have questions, comments, and discussion. First, a couple of housekeeping points. The bathrooms are downstairs, right underneath where this room is if you just sort of drop through the floor. Emergency exits right to my right. We've got lots and lots of information and handouts. Please join Friends of Lolo Peak and help support the work by getting involved. There are also action sheets if you feel moved to write letters to the key decision makers, and we have display tables throughout. We are planning another community meeting in Lolo, probably sometime in March. We will keep researching the issues and making sure that any information is public information. To begin our program, we have a slideshow put together by a local icon, Mario Locatelli. Do I say that right? Better known as the mountain goat of the Bitterroot, or as the oldest man to climb Mount McKinley, depending which one you want to remember him by. He's going to show us some slides featuring the magnificent Bitterroot Mountains, which he knows every one. Mario?
Mamma mia, I never had such a big crowd. Anyway, the last 35 years, I've hiked all the Bitterroot Range, from Lolo to Nez Perce Pass, all the drainages and all the ridges into Idaho. And it's just awesome up there, you know, and it's just awesome. I climb mountains all over the United States, and I haven't seen anything that surpasses the beauty of the west side of the Bitterroot. But you really have to be up there to really see it. When you drive down in the valley and look up there, you just don't see the beauty that is up there. And I would hate to see a ski place going on Lolo. We have to keep that for the next generation. I'm 72 years old and I still enjoy it, you know. I like to see my grandkids enjoy that, what I enjoyed it. When I'm out there, I feel like an eagle. I feel like I'm soaring like an eagle. I mean, there's just a feeling that just awesome. But anyway, I have a few slides. I have about 4 hours of slides. But they asked me just to bring a few, so I only have a few. But anyway, I'd like to show you the few slides that I have. And I just hope that all of you agree that we got to keep that the ski place off that mountain. I mean, it's just too awesome. Anyway, gives you an idea what it looks like from the top of the peaks here. This is looking west. It's looking down in the valley. Oh, this is actually up St. Mary. You can see I was up on the tower there, St. Mary, at the fire lookout. This is a young fellow. He was a friend of mine's boy. He was 11 years old at the time. Now he's 30 years old. Boy, time goes by. This is a friend of mine who's trying to learn how to ski. Anyway, I caught him in action. Oh, this is inside a snow cave. This is up Little Joe. We are skiing off the top there, west of Stevensville. There's George Cohn. He's the county attorney in Hamilton. It's George Cohn. George and Jason and a couple of dogs. This is up Gash Peak. It's looking down at the valley. It's all under the clouds that morning. it's a lot of fun skiing up there. I mean, you get a good workout getting up to the, you ski up and then you climb the mountain and then you ski down, It's a good exercise and it's a lot of fun. It's all free. Yeah. The telemarkers. You get a good base and about 10, 15 inches of powder, and man, I mean, it's a lot of fun. It's just awesome. Okay, that's on ski now. I got a lot of good pictures, but I just choose to take just a few pictures. Sometimes maybe it'll take me a couple of hours to get close enough, I pretend to be an animal myself, And then they both get curious. I had some of them come right up to me and knock me over, And they finally realized I wasn't going to hurt them. Now this goat, I got so close that I actually had to back away so I can get to the fish in it. But these goats are so beautiful in the winter because they have the winter coat on, and it's just look gorgeous. This is a big female nanny. Kid. This is a mama with their 2 kids. A couple of yearlings. Little snag up there. Now this goat here, I talked her into post for me. I said, look left, look right, look at me. This guy, he came right up to me, and I took some pictures of a long ways off, and then I got behind the rock to put another film, so I put another film in. And all of a sudden, it's right there. This is a young Billy, probably a 2-year-old Billy. This is a bear, cinnamon color. This is a sow bear with the 2 cubs. It's another big bear. There's a little baby grouse. This is the mama grouse. She tells me, get out of here. She didn't like me to be there. Some of the flowers that grows way up in the mountain. This is a lion climbing a tree. Bull elk. Says, I'm gonna get out of here. There's another big bull elk. Grouse. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Mario. Oh, can you hit the lights, Joe? Our next presenter is John Ferguson. He obtained a law degree and a master's degree from the University of Montana, practiced law for a few years in Portland, Oregon, before taking the position as the Montana Water Trust's first executive director. John is starting his 4th year as director and has given numerous presentations on water issues throughout Montana and the Pacific Northwest. And here's John.
Thank you, everyone. My name is John Ferguson, and I appreciate the opportunity to address you today. And basically what I want to do is to provide you with the background and knowledge regarding water rights and how water rights could potentially be used in this proposed resort, so you that have the information to make decisions and analyze these impacts and participate in this public discourse on this proposed resort. So to begin with, I want to provide you a little more background about myself so you understand my perspective that I'm giving today. I was trained as a lawyer, again, practiced law for a few years in Oregon, took over as the director of the Montana Water Trust. And as director of the Water Trust, I deal with water rights issues on a day-to-day basis. And basically, we work with landowners throughout Montana and throughout the Bitterroot watershed as well to identify cooperative projects where we can benefit both them as well as acquire water rights for protection in-stream to benefit aquatic ecosystems. So I'm going to be talking today from that perspective, and that's what most concerns me about this, the proposed resort, is its impacts on the Lolo Creek watershed and the Carlton Creek watershed and the populations of bull trout and west slope cutthroat trout that are present there. So I'm going to cover a lot of information, and to begin with, I'm going to give you some brief background on the prior appropriation doctrine, the beneficial use provisions of the prior appropriation doctrine, the types of water rights that are there as they relate to snowmaking and others, talk about the period of use that is available for water rights, and how this all comes together in a change application when someone proposes to transfer one right, whether it's irrigation water right, to be used for another, such as for snowmaking, for recreation, and how that works and how you as the public can participate in that process. And finally, I want to touch on the status of water adjudication in Montana and how that has impacts and effects on this proposed resort, as well as the current landowners and water right holders in those areas that are affected. So with respect to the prior appropriation doctrine, I'm going to cover the history, as well as one of the fundamental elements of prior appropriation, which is the water system that governs water use in Montana, and that is called the first in time, first in right. So prior appropriation emerged in the 1800s, basically out of California, as people moved west and started diverting water for mining practices. And what was different is this system grew out of one that occurred in the eastern United States, which was called the riparian system. And that required that somebody own property abutting the watercourse where they were diverting. However, in Montana and the New West, folks were diverting water into distant locations, applying it to mining, applying it to other uses, and this system allowed them to flexibly occupy the New West. And it's this system that currently governs water rights in Montana, under which this proposed development and the water rights in it will be viewed. So, in the New West came with, not only did people start using water, but it really was the Wild West. Folks were shot and killed over water rights. Folks were, killed with shovels. Water rights have been in dispute ever since the West began. And, so they developed a system to help accommodate and to lessen those disputes that were arising. And so it was set up with this priority system, again, first in time, first in right, which means if someone comes to Lolo Creek, starts diverting water, applying it to irrigation use in, say, 1800, they acquired a water right for that amount that they diverted and applied to, whether it was mining or irrigation. And if someone else then moved in 1910, and started doing the same thing, they would acquire water. But however, in a water short year, if there was only water available for one person, it would be that person who started diverting water in the 1800s. So here's a schematic to help you understand this a little bit more. So in this case, Johnson, let's say, moved to Lolo Creek in 1870, started diverting water. Smith moved to Lolo Creek in 1915, started diverting water, applying it to grow hay and stock water for cattle and others. And then Mr. Brown came there in 1928 and diverted water for irrigation, domestic, and other purposes. Again, if there was only enough water for 2 people, that water would be available to Johnson and Smith, and Brown would not have any water availability. And what that means to the Bitterroot Resort is, at this point, we're not sure which water rights are potentially going to be used for snowmaking. But unless they have, sufficient priority to have enough water available for snowmaking, we're in the midst of a 7-year drought. So a lot of folks are having their water cut off year after year, and so it really needs to be analyzed whether they even have the rights to go forward to make enough snow for this development in the first place. And then in 1973, the Montana Water Use Act was passed, and what this did was validate all those water rights that grew up out of the mining years in Montana, and confirm those as valid. And then it also required the individuals who acquired those water rights to make sure, whether it was Farmer Brown, to go down to the courthouse by 1982 and file with the court, hey, I used 3 cubic feet per second of water to irrigate 100 acres of land in the Bitterroot to grow alfalfa. And in doing so, I used 2,000 acre feet. And then what's been set up since then is that the DNRC, the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, was then set up to administer water rights in Montana and for transfers and changes in use. And then the Water Use Act also created the Water Court, which is now the new court to begin settling disputes about this. And I'll talk more about how to deal with the water rights when people had to file them and claim them. And in 1982, a lot of them were not familiar with exactly how much they may have really in fact been using. So the adjudication that I'll talk about later is to handle that and to make sure that what people really have is what they historically used, not what they claimed on paper, which could be an issue with these resort water rights as well. In the prior appropriation doctrine, there's a number of enumerated ways from the Montana legislature of what you can use water for. And that's for irrigation, fish and wildlife, recreation, which means it is legal in Montana to use water rights to make snow, as well as others such as mining and power and municipal. With respect to irrigation, these are many of the common ones, and likely many of the water rights that would be used for the proposed resort are irrigation ones. Other water rights are fish and wildlife ones. The Water Trust, we actually hold in-stream water rights to benefit fish and aquatic ecosystems. But what's key, this is a map showing dewatered streams in Montana, and there's over 3,500 of them. But what's also on this list is both Lolo Creek and Carlton Creek. These are creeks that the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has put on this list because they have the potential for significant fisheries value. But however, due to man flow cost depletions, there's not enough flow to support healthy populations. So groups such as the Water Trust and others have been working to get more water in stream to create healthy aquatic ecosystems, to help bring back migratory bull trout to these creeks, as well as west slope cutthroat trout. And that's why we're primarily, this is one of our biggest concerns, is that, this proposed development is, it's not going to increase flows, that's going to have a negative impact on the works that folks have been doing in these watersheds. And again, recreation is a beneficial use of water. So there's many types of water rights as well, ranging from surface water rights, storage water rights such as the Carlton Lake Reservoir, which may be used for snowmaking, as well as the Little Carlton Lake Reservoir, as well as groundwater. However, this is a complex array of water rights that covers vast amount of acreages, and has, you know, complex interactions. And at this point, we haven't been told which water rights may be used, where they're located, the amounts of these water rights, the priority dates. So until we receive that information, you know, it's hard to really have the public discourse because we don't have the correct information to analyze and to really make an informed decision about what's being proposed. Period of use is something that likely will be an issue with this resort, because many agricultural irrigation water rights are limited to a specific period, meaning from April through October, which, you know, matches up with the time when you have the ability to grow crops or hay or other things like that. So potentially there's going to be an issue. Well, they may seek to transfer some of these periods of use or change them to winter withdrawals. And it's at that point that I will talk about later, there's an opportunity to provide public input and objections regarding to the adverse impact to other water right holders, landowners, and to your legitimate interests in seeking the ecological integrity of that area. So this is a flow chart of the change application that the proposed resort will have to go through. And I'm not going to take you through all of this, but I mean, I think the point is, you know, this is a complicated process. There's a lot going on here. But the key point is it's the burden on the developer to show that there's going to be no adverse impact to existing water right holders, landowners, or other legitimate interests. And there's a number of ways that adverse impact can occur to these systems. And that includes both changing the timing of a water right, changing the use from irrigation to recreation. And what this all can translate into is, say, you know, the water right has historically been used, that the developers are intending to use for irrigation on an adjacent piece of property. It had been flood irrigated, which is a method of irrigation in the spring and summer. But now it's going to be proposed for, you know, diverted at a different time and applied to a different area. And this may result in reducing what we call return flows that provide, you know, seep back through the shallow aquifer and provide late summer stream flows, as well as other landowners require and have begun to use those water rights themselves and acquire an interest. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues that are going to come up, but, you know, we need to know which water rights that are being proposed to use, and then to really be able to analyze them and make some real analyze them. But again, what's important is, first of all, when the change application for transferring water rights comes before the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, the public has the right and the ability to object and say, hey, you know, we think we're going to be our interest is going to be adversely impacted. At that case, the developer has the opportunity to try to resolve these you know, in a voluntary, outside of court manner. However, if that can't happen, then it goes through an administrative court process and possibly to appeals to district court. But what's important is that you can participate, and unlike the National Environmental Policy Act, as many of you may be familiar with, you know, this process does have teeth. Meaning if they can't show there's not going to be adverse impacts to stated interests, the DNRC can reject their application for using irrigation agricultural water rights for snowmaking. And finally, I want to hit on adjudication, and this is important because, again, in 1973, the Water Use Act was passed requiring all farmers and irrigators to go claim how much they thought they were using by 1982. But the key point is folks didn't have you know, flow meters, staff gauges, you know, ways of measuring water, so they merely estimated what they thought they'd been using. So a lot of the water rights are not correct or overinflated, some deflated. And so the adjudication process, which is run by the Montana Water Court, is to go through all the water courts, all of the watersheds, including the Lolo Creek and Carlton, which hasn't happened yet, to confirm how much, what people really have been using, what their water rights are. And you know, before a resort of this size goes in, you know, that stuff, that needs to occur. Otherwise, there are going to be adverse impacts, because folks need to know what they've been using, you know, what their real rights are before such an impact is to occur. And so one way to do that is for the local water right holders to petition for a water commissioner, which is basically someone who would go along the Lolo Creek or Carlton Creek and measure who's taking what, how much is coming down these creeks, to really figure out what sort of water is available, especially during the drought, and is there sufficient water available to even support this? And that information currently does not exist and needs to be collected in order for the public to analyze this and make informed decisions. And further, there needs to be a hydrologic report studying the connection between surface and groundwater, because these are, highly complex hydrologic regimes with a lot of interactions. When you start moving water around and people around, we need to know, well, what is going to happen here? How's this going to affect the fishery restoration work that's occurred and the wildlife habitat and, groundwater wells and other landowners' water rights that they've been using for irrigation. So in conclusion, this is a complex system, both in water rights and with regard to the ecosystem. But again, it's the developer's burden to show no adverse impact to these other water right holders and interests and landowners, and that there is the opportunity for the public to participate during this process. And finally, we should seek that they come forward with as soon as possible scientifically credible data. That is, scientific methods are open for public scrutiny so that we can really make those informed decisions and have a public discourse that is real. Thank you.
I think that was Water Rights 400, not 101. Thank you, John. Our next presenter is Steve Seninger, who is a professor in the School of Business at the University of Montana. He is a PhD economist and has consulted and advised numerous corporations and government agencies on economic development and community change. And yeah, can you see that?
I know I'm supposed to click something because this is technology. My name is Steve Seninger, and I welcome you here, and glad to see such a big crowd of people who want to find out what's going on about this proposed ski resort. Basically, a couple of comments before we get into some of the first points, and that is the work I do as an economist is specializing in economic development and community change. And as I come into this group and look at what is being proposed in terms of a ski area, I come into it as not only a professional economist, but also as a hiker, a backpacker, a skier, a paddler, a birder, and probably a couple of other labels, most of which are pretty polite. And that's really my involvement in terms of my feelings about Lolo Peak. In terms of the economic development impacts, of course, that's where I really want to take a very close look. Now, 2 points. First of all the information I'm presenting tonight has sources, and they're documented on our website. If you go to lolopk.com, we have the sources listed. .org, sorry. Very important distinction. All the sources are listed, so you can go to that to find out where this information came from. The second point, and this is a broader point, is that the project we're looking at is really a scale that needs to be appreciated. It is a proposed resort real estate development that will be the largest and the most massive in North America. And I mean, reading from the website for the project, basically it would be rivaled, and this is in their words, it would be rivaled only by Vail, Snowmass, and Aspen in Colorado, Baldy Mountain at Ketchum, Idaho, Jackson Mountain at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Mineral King in California, and Whistler Mountain in British Columbia. So this is not a local ski area, it is a massive resort real estate development. And to get into that in terms of the economic impact, first what I'd like to do is take a look at, if I can point this in the right direction and do the right clicker, to look at what public lands represent as they currently exist in the Missoula and Bitterroot valleys. And basically, undeveloped lands like the Lolo Peak area are high economic value assets to the communities. It's been identified in studies time and time again that basically, when we look at these lands, that they affect the quality of life, they're an asset, and they're part of the economic base in attracting new people and businesses. And the kinds of businesses that this land attracts are really the kinds of businesses that bring in the sort of jobs that people like to see, people in the community like to see in their employment base. Jobs in the information resource, in the human resource area, jobs in healthcare and business services. So the point being that as we look at the public lands, the undeveloped lands about the Lolo Peak area, they are already serving a useful economic function. Now, what will be the impact of this resort real estate development on the public lands? And I think already by indicating the massive size of the scale of the operation, we're looking at the industrialization and commercialization of those lands for basically that real estate project at the bottom of the mountain. The ski resort is icing on the cake that helps from all industry sources as a way that we sell real estate. It's a one-way street. Once Lolo Peak is converted into a ski area, we're looking at undeveloped public lands now being occupied by lift towers, lifts, roads, restaurant cafes on ridges, and many other things which will be visually apparent from the valley. So I think some of the vision and the imaging that Daphne was talking about at the onset is going to be dramatically changed as we see this ski resort real estate development take place. The basic loss of the public land which belongs to the public is a loss for all of us. You know, no matter what the activity, whether we're viewing it, whether we're up there actively participating or climbing the ridges and looking at the mountain goats or whatever, it is a loss of land that is owned by all of us. Now, there are a number of economic impacts, and what I've done in my research is to take a look at what is known in terms of the kinds of job impacts that accompany these types of projects, and then to look at some of the cost of living and the housing cost impacts that accompany resort real estate projects of this scale. And basically, when you take a look around at other big resorts in Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, and you analyze data that's collected by government agencies trying to plan and cope with many of the impacts, that jobs at many of these destination resort areas are not high-wage jobs. In one survey, in fact, done by the Colorado Department of Labor for resorts in Colorado, the 40%, 43% of the vacancies that they were trying to recruit for, and they were doing the survey for employers trying to recruit, were basically $10 an hour jobs or less. So these are not high-wage jobs. And we have to realize that when jobs are sort of put out there as one of the big attractions of why such a project would be desirable. Many of these jobs that we look at are without benefits, without things like health insurance. So there's another aspect of the quality of job in addition to the wages. And then finally, when we look at the jobs themselves, the jobs are typically for some of the lower wage, lower skill occupations involving food handling, delivery, maintenance, cleanup, clerking, and things like that. So when we look at the jobs and we look at the skill levels and we look at the wages at resort real estate developments around the country, particularly in the western U.S. and the western states, basically we're looking at jobs that don't provide a living wage for workers who are trying to support their families. It becomes a real difficult proposition. Now, this is some data from a 2001 survey conducted by the Colorado Department of Labor. It's an analysis of vacancies in what is called the resort counties of northwest Colorado, including some of those big resorts that are mentioned that this project will rival. And when you look at the occupation breakdown by occupation, basically it falls into two very broad categories. There are, as I said earlier, lower wage, lower skill jobs. If you take food, prep, serving, driving and loading, office clerking, cleaning and maintenance, they added up to about 60% of all the vacancies, the approximately 2,300 job vacancies that were surveyed in this piece of research. The other 40% represented sales, business services, and somewhat higher occupational categories. So, point being that many of the jobs are indeed lower skilled occupational categories for these resorts. Now, the other part of it, along with the jobs, is what happens to the cost of living in these communities. And basically, the cost of living is impacted dramatically. As you can well imagine, if we're talking about projects comparable to an Aspen, to a Whistler, etc., the impacts are going to be very dramatic. They're going to be very dramatic in terms of the housing cost, particularly near the place of employment. And basically what has happened in many of these resort real estate developments in the western states is that workers cannot afford to live near them. They simply can't afford the housing rental or home ownership. And what that leads to is, in fact, a much larger increase of second homes for out-of-state owners, many of which are priced at the $500,000 mark or above. And the impact then in terms of land prices are lots, which are now being reported in the media in the Whitefish area, of lots at $160,000 to $350,000. And I put lots in parentheses because it's not a big chunk of land. It's a piece of land to put a house on. So those are some of the cost of living impacts. And when we look at those impacts in local communities, again, taking as another example, a single-family dwelling in Jackson, Wyoming, recently reported in the media as $615,000. So again, very high prices. And essentially, these translate directly, no matter what the property tax rate, into higher property tax payments. Obviously, it's a matter of arithmetic. If we look at rising land and housing prices and costs, your property tax bill goes up commensurate with that. So the cost of living in some of the resort counties, and this is a study done by the Northwestern Colorado Council of Governments, who is it's a coalition of county governments tracking the cost of living in these resort counties, is anywhere from 700 to 300% higher than average U.S. communities. This graphic kind of nails it for some of the resorts such as Vail, Aspen, and Breckenridge. It's 2004 data, very fresh, robust, current data, and it shows what's going on in those communities in terms of housing costs. This is for a family of four, kind of a medium type of house in terms of square footage, and it's costed out in those communities against a U.S. average, which is over 160 communities, so it's a very wide, robust average. And we can see that in Aspen, in that resort county, housing costs are 783% compared to the benchmark of 100. And likewise in Breckenridge and Vail, the housing costs are higher. And there's also data in that report which is cited on the website that gives you a better idea of what some of the other cost differences are in addition to housing costs. So major impacts that way from resort real estate developments. Now, basically, what does this do? Well, essentially, workers can't afford to live near the jobs. They commute. They may be commuting, as in some cases in Colorado and the resort counties, or from Driggs, Idaho to Jackson, Wyoming, 60 and 70 miles over mountain roads. We're basically looking at longer commutes and more sprawl, as particularly the high-priced land is filled up around the resort real estate developments with trophy homes for out-of-state homeowners. And basically, these developments are not what we consider to be communities for families as we understand it in terms of kids going to school locally, families who work locally and buy from local businesses and participate in community activities, whether it's Little League Baseball, churches, etc. So it's really quite a different kind of community of part-time homeowners, largely from out of state. There's also some other impacts that one can expect to see. And again, when you research these issues and you look at what's going on in the Colorado resorts, in Utah, in the Park City area, Sun Valley, Idaho, basically there's some infrastructure impacts, typically involving the road system, freeways and bypass roads for fast transport of out-of-state second homeowners to the resort real estate site. And as we think about it in our own area and quality of life issues, which I think loom very largely in terms of what might happen, we find that we may be seeing bypass roads through residential areas such as Target Range, Lolo Community, along the highway in the Bitterroot Valley, particularly servicing people who land their jets at the Hamilton Airport. There's also in all of this, in addition to these physical infrastructure impacts, social service impacts, because basically workers without benefits, without health insurance, who live away from the job have social service needs in terms of public health clinics and other kinds of problems and issues. So that these again fall on the burden of local governments, some of which aren't even located near the resort counties. And that's another kind of impact. Basically, the question then becomes, as we look at the job impacts and the community impacts in terms of cost of living, housing cost, infrastructure, social service impacts, what do we really want or do we really need these kinds of jobs? And it's pretty obvious if you look around Missoula and you've been here for a while that we're not an economically depressed area. In fact, if you look at data that's collected by the Center for the Rocky Mountain West, which takes Missoula County and compares it to 50 peer regions in western states, we rank number 7 in terms of job growth. So we're very high in terms of that performance. If we look at job growth in the Bitterroot Valley over the past 3 years, that's been 10% over that 3-year period. And basically, we have new households, businesses, and increasingly better jobs, certainly in the Missoula Regional Service Trade Center as it begins to expand and cover a much larger geographic area. And that isn't to say that it's still tough, that Montana families do still have to work hard to make ends meet. It's not like it's a cakewalk. But at the same time, if we look at the impacts from this proposed resort real estate development, as they've been experienced in other communities, it's not going to help in terms of what that offers as far as higher cost of living and low-wage jobs. Now, the other point of all of this, as we look at these economic impacts and their relation to our undeveloped public lands, basically we're talking about irreversible impacts. These are things that once they get set into motion are forces beyond any kind of control of a community. And we're looking at increased cost of living, taxes, congestion, out-of-state second homeowners, which will certainly impact our quality of life. We'll be looking at that quality of life change, which will be sort of a going around the corner, if you will, in terms of what we think we're dealing with now. And all you got to do is just drive along Ketchum and Sun Valley and Park City, Utah, and places like that to get some sense of what those communities are going through and what their quality of life is now. Basically, the loss of Lolo Peak as public land for all is forever, obviously. We can't go back. And in addition to all this hard economic data, I thought I'd end on a softer note, and that is Lolo Peak is sort of the vision. And to do that, I don't refer to an economist, but rather to a politician who's a little more eloquent than a mere economist. And that is a quote from our governor, Brian Schweitzer. On land, people all over Montana know that the treasure is the mountains, is the rivers, is the open vistas. The treasure of Montana is Montana itself. That concludes my presentation. I thank you for your attention, and we will have, I believe, a question session.
Thank you, Steve. I think only an economist will refer to data as robust. I love it. Our next presentation is John Vorey, a Bitterroot area wildlife biologist. For 24 years, he's been with the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. He lives in Hamilton. He was educated at the other school, and wildlife biology and wildlife management. And he's going to talk about the wildlife as it exists today and some of the potential impacts. Thank you, John. I didn't mean that.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm surprised and really pleased to see the number of people here. Had I known, I'd have brought along more pictures of my dog and my daughter. And,
There we go.
there we go. And we're working right now on, I need to turn that on, a little bit of some technical stuff here. Is it plugged in there? Yeah. Here, I just need to turn the computer on, of course. As I laughingly refer to, I have to bring my whole PC along here. That's my Fish, Wildlife, and Parks laptop there. But as Daphne said, I'm going to be talking a little bit, mostly about what we have there right now for wildlife and what kind of wildlife species are likely to be impacted. I will talk a little bit about the types of impacts or probable impacts. These are Canada geese. Now, Branta canadensis, and the probable impact of the Lolo development on Canada geese is probably pretty minimal, really. But I'll show you a little bit about the type of data that I collect and how I use it first off. Now, as you can see, that's the Bitterroot Valley as a whole. Here's the map on the right. Here to orient you, of course, there is Missoula, there's Lolo. I'm going to get rid of the Maclay property there for right now. And then here's Stevensville, Hamilton. But I want to talk about elk first. That is one of the big issues with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and one of the ones that many people are concerned about. And I'll show you first about how we collect the data. And I'm going to focus in on the north half of the valley for right now. And when we, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, go out and count elk, it's usually done in the spring during what we call the green up period. And here's, you can see, leaving Hamilton Airport and going up the little creek and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then every time, recently anyway, with the GIS type of stuff, we can put where we see elk. And so each of those dots is a group of elk. Now if we do, that was 1 day's flight there, by the way. It takes about a month to do the whole valley, but that was 1 day's flight. I just wanted you to get a feel for how that information is collected. If you take the whole complete data set for 1 year, each of those dots there represents a group of elk. And for example, this group of elk, let me get this group of elk right there was there we go. Am I not on the right one there? Here we go. And for each group, so that was 74 elk right there. That was 63 cows and 20 calves and 1 bull in there. So this is the type of information we collect, and I've done it with GPS technology here for the past 3 years. And I'll just put those 3 years data up there, because what I want to show you is, and probably what you're starting to see here, is that there are areas that are important elk winter ranges. Now this is winter range here. And here's an important elk winter range area. Here's an important elk winter range, as is this down here. And if we look at those areas just north of Hamilton, on the west side of the valley, this is one of the more important ones, and I'll put the Maclay property right up there. So you can see where we are as far as winter range and where those elk hang out. Now most ski developments aren't on winter range. Most of them are in alpine areas. If I think of the ones that I'm familiar with anyway, you know, Big Mountain, Big Sky, Jackson Hole, that's an alpine environment. That's elk summer range. And development there does not have the impact on elk that it does on winter range. And so that's our major concern here, is that this is on winter range. Winter range is a limiting range to elk because elk need some place to be in the wintertime. It's not actually a forage thing so much as just a place to be. They need square footage to stand on. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here on this property, the one that we are discussing here tonight. And there you can see the Maclay property right there. And I want to take, now that is just where elk groups have been. That doesn't necessarily mean that's, of course, the only place where they are. But I will put up here a little polygon that I have put together that shows in this area where elk have, where I've been seeing elk most often. And of course, it's right there. This is the point I want to get across, is that it's a major elk winter range in the north part of the valley there. And so I've taken and just these are rough anyway. These are just drawings that I put in there, these polygons, but I took them off of the proposal or the draft proposal that we have. You can see that would be where the village would be, and this is roughly where housing would be. Here's roughly where the golf course would be, and here's where new roads would be. So that, of course, is right in major elk winter range. Now, I want to stress also that the impacts to elk of a footprint like that, keep in mind that is just a footprint, just as your effect on an animal out there in the woods is more than the footprint that you're standing on. Likewise, development like this has a lot bigger effect than just the footprint of the development itself. Things like disturbance due to people walking, people taking their dogs out. Dogs are a big one because dogs oftentimes run wild. away from their owners. Nobody, of course, had that happen, including myself. But I mean, we're all guilty of that. But the fact of the matter is that it does occur. We have research from northwest Montana where we've had cameras set out on white-tailed deer winter range to monitor white-tailed movements, but we've also seen dogs on the same day, the same dog, at camera sites 2.5 miles apart. So they go a long ways, and they can disturb a lot of wildlife. Keep in mind, this is not only winter range, this is also spring range, and of course spring starting around June or May 15th to June 15th is calving time and fawning time for deer and elk, so there could be some major impacts there as well. Now the rest of the development is, of course, on summer range and other seasonal winter ranges, but these are the ones that have major impacts on elk anyway. As I mentioned before.
Creek Road is there, so we can tell where that's at a little more?
Pardon me?
Can you show us where Carlton Creek Road's at, so we can tell where that's at a little? Is that one?
Let me get my pointer here. Well, here, the Carlton Creek comes right down through, here's Carlton Creek right here, coming right down here. And so this, I believe that's Carlton Creek Road right there. Can you see the arrow? Yep. So now I'm going to have to try to find my little deal at the top there. Because there are other species, of course, involved here, the impacts of this would impact other species. Ungulates, of course, deer and elk are of the major concern down here, where the village and attendant housing developments and the golf course would be. I guess one comment that I would make about that golf course is that in talking with Mr. McClay on the development of the golf course there, that it would have an elk-proof fence around it. So of course it would be an exclusive use from that standpoint. That unless he's going to fence the elk in, which I don't think is going to be the case. Now here, of course, that's basically the map that I showed you before with the current elk use on there. Now, one thing I'd like to stress too is that currently there are about 130 elk that use that area, but that is not relative to the potential. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has worked with Mr. McClay, being a rancher, to keep the elk numbers below what the potential is. So I always think of habitat as a wildlife biologist. What is the potential of the habitat? We have areas in the Bitterroot that currently support in the area of 5 to 6 times the density of elk right there. And so the potential of this area for elk is a lot higher than currently being used. And of course, anytime you compromise the habitat itself, you also compromise that potential for for more elk to be there. This shows then some of the other areas that would be developed with ski runs and ski lifts and stuff, which in the wintertime wouldn't have a lot of effect on elk. However, in a winter like this, if there was snowmaking going on up there and stuff, because in a winter like this, elk are spread out a lot more than they are in a winter when we get a lot of snow. And so the impacts the impacts of skiing and use of these ski runs and stuff could be greater in a winter like this. Now lynx is another one that comes up a lot. All of this area that's being proposed for development is habitat for where there's 3 threatened mammalian species that use this area, lynx being one, the gray wolf another, grizzly bear. This is certainly grizzly bear habitat, although it may not be occupied currently. It certainly is, and it's likely that it would be in the future. I mean, we've had grizzly bears come pretty close to this property here. And so it certainly is potential grizzly bear habitat. It's occupied lynx habitat, as is gray wolf. We also have a couple other species of concern, which is on the Montana Heritage Program's list of species of concern. That is wolverine and fisher. This is habitat for both of those forest carnivores. Both of those are pretty sensitive to any activities, particularly in the wintertime. In the case of, say, wolverine, for example, that have their young in the wintertime from January to May, and their use of their natal dens is impacted or can be impacted quite a bit by any activity. And so it's certainly could impact those. This shows you some of the lynx habitat, or where are we here? Yeah, lynx. This shows you lynx habitat, and the area in the yellow, dark yellow line is that area proposed for development of the ski runs and ski lifts, and it shows you the lynx habitat in there. Again, I'm just pointing out that we do have these species there. We know it's occupied lynx habitat. We also know that it's occupied wolverine habitat. In addition to those species, there are some that are potential candidates for species of concern, and one is a particularly favorite of mine, the hoary marmot. I love those little guys. But at any rate, of course, well, I do. At any rate, of course, Lolo Peak, Dr. Wright from the university here had documented hoary marmots on Lolo Peak back in the 1950s. I haven't been there yet to see if those colonies are still extant. I've been elsewhere in the Bitterroots and documented where colonies are. I will make a point, of course, this summer of getting up there to see what the status is on hoary marmots right now, and perhaps Mario could probably tell me all kinds about that.
They're all over the Bitterroot.
Yeah, yeah.
They're way up there high.
Yep. They're really a neat little animal, but development up there could impact them as well. And that being said, and I've focused mostly on the major species here, there could be potential impacts on a whole host of other smaller, minor species. Dr. Carrie Forsman from the university has been doing some work in the Bitterroot Valley on the impacts of development on small mammals and birds, and that can have serious impacts on small mammal and bird populations because, again, of the feral domestic cats in that case mostly. And so there can be a pretty substantial impact from that as well. There are a few species that do pretty well with development. I'm thinking of European starling, English sparrow. They do pretty well. But other ones can be impacted pretty much. So I guess I've just addressed the major species and where we are with those. And with that, I guess I'm pretty much done.
Hey, John, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
It appears that the proposed resort is in between, like, the winter range and the summer range. Now, wouldn't that impact the migration of those animals as well? Like,
Well, it could, depending on what kind of use there is up there at that time. You know, migration is a spring and fall type of a thing, and so it depends on what kind of use there would be up there at that time, as far as elk and deer are concerned anyway. The major concern for elk and deer is on winter range.
The question was, how much this is proposed on private versus public land? The only numbers that I have heard at a public meeting that Mr. McClay held is his land is about 3,000 acres. The impact on the public land, he said, was about 10,000 acres. But on the website, the total acreage of this proposal is about 50,000. So we haven't put the numbers together yet, but that's what's sort of out there. That leads to the question and answer period. And what I would just like to say before we start, that there is a lot of information if some of your questions aren't answered around on the booths and tables. And the other thing I wanted to say is that we do have U.S. Forest Service personnel here who could help us clarify some of the very complex processes that the Forest Service is going through. And we have information about that process on the back table there. So we will take questions, and our four speakers will be available to answer any questions. Ma'am.
Can you show on the map what's the place?
The question was, can he put up on the map what is Mr. McClay's private land and what is the public land?
On this map right here, his boundary is right about in here. where the little hand is going up and down right there. So most of this up in here is on Forest Service property, and most of this down here is on McLean.
Okay, the little hand that is going up and down,
This, yeah, this isn't the. Now the big hand that's going up and down. Right about in through here is about where the property boundary is. So this down here is on private land. This up here is public land. So from about right in here.
Point out Lolo.
okay,
Lolo Peak is right here.
What's the specific impact of bull trout as far as water rights?
Well, I'm not a fisheries biologist, and I'm not the person to be addressing that, but the dewatering, of course, is one of the major things that they'd be looking at, and perhaps John would be a better person to address that than myself.
and then ma'am, your question is next. You've been very patient, thank you.
Yeah, with respect to bull trout and water rights, in Upper Lolo Creek, there's a healthy population of resident bull trout. It confirmed with the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks fisheries biologist, Lad Notek. And at this point, in order to restore migratory bull trout and help that threatened species, which is listed under the Endangered Species Act, to recover to healthy populations, the restoration goal is to get enough water back into Lolo Creek to connect it with the Bitterroot River. And at this point, there isn't sufficient flow for that to happen. But that is the goal. And use of the water rights out of Lolo Creek could potentially negatively impact that restoration works that is occurring, and prevent that connection of Lolo to the Bitterroot from happening. The year-long flow. Yeah, the year-long flow is critical. I mean, I'm going to defer, the strict biology questions to a fisheries biologist. But yeah, I mean, you need sufficient flow in there to maintain both residents and migratory fry as well as others. So yeah, there's numbers out there and goals to be met for stream flows. And that's what our major concern is, that this is going to negatively impact that. And so we'd like to see some more information from them on that.
Ma'am?
Paid for by the developer, who would likely go to land and water consultants and get the results that they would like to see.
Again, I just refer to a meeting that some of us attended in Florence, and other thoughts about what to do with his land. He has considered them, but when you consider that lots of 1 acre, half an acre, he is already asking $400,000 for. I don't know if we could ever. Yes. So I don't know if that is but it is a great option, and let's start saving our pennies now.
And what about the cost for a water study? One that was neutral.
What are the costs of a neutral water study?
Well, I mean, basically a water study of the I mean, it would be a pretty significant and large water study that needs to be conducted, analyzing both surface and groundwater connections. And that could range anywhere from, potentially $20,000 to up to $50,000. But with the potential impacts and all the adverse effects, as well as the potential income that they may derive from this, that's an amount that needs to be spent. And and I would imagine that the funds are available to conduct that, and then it would be a matter of finding the neutral party, who can conduct this in an open way for people to participate and scrutinize the methods used.
Yes.
The elk habitat, the winter range that you were talking about, isn't that all on private land right now?
Yeah.
On his private land?
Most of it is on private land, not all of it.
And given that he's already committed himself to developing that property, isn't that winter range pretty well shot already?
Well, if it goes that way, I mean, he is committed, as I understand it. Now, I can't speak for Mr. McLean.
Well, having been up there and seen what he's done, he's probably dumped $500,000 into infrastructure up there already. I mean, it looks to me like he's going ahead with it. Is that winter range pretty well toast at this point?
Not right now, it's not. No, not as we speak, it's not.
But when he gets done doing the development,
He doesn't get the public property, his private land's not worth nearly as much, and so this development will be completely different, and to a much smaller scale.
And
This
he,
is all based on public lands access right now, and without the public lands, it's worth a lot less.
yeah. And he may choose to develop, if he doesn't get the public land as part of this, he may choose to develop his land anyway. Yes, that's true, and the impacts would be the same, or perhaps not, depending on what the density and where the development were to occur.
What's the process for the Forest Service to make that choice? Where are they with the permits?
The question is, where is the Forest Service in that process? And I'm going to ask Maggie Pittman to come up and briefly explain a very long process.
Yes, I'll do it in 5 seconds or less. Yeah, I'm Maggie Pittman with the Missoula Ranger District, and we are in a very specific process. We've got a very iterative process that's outlined for us under a special use permit application process, and I brought in the back, those of you that want to pick up a salmon-colored piece of paper, and it lines out the steps and the screening process that an applicant that wants this type of a development on public land to go through. Essentially, we're there right now. Mr. McClay has given us a conceptual idea, an initial proposal, and we will take it through 2 levels of screening. Now, he has to be able to show that he can meet these screening criteria in the first level before we can get to the second one. That's where we are right now. It's very systematic, very specific. The public interest in this is important to us, and the fact that we take our time to look through the stuff that he's given us to make sure that he complies with our laws and policies.
Process to turn it into a wilderness area.
Well, now there is no application process to turn it into a wilderness area.
Turn it into, to change the designation of
To-
that area.
We are,
Doable. No, I'm working with Congress right now on something that is.
right.
Can you explain to him the IRA status that's currently there on that land?
Sure. The currently, under the current forest plan, which many of you probably know, we're in the process of revising our forest plan. You do know that, right? Okay. So,
I'll give you the mic.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Okay. The current forest plan that we are under designates certain management areas. The Lolo Peak roadless area is included in management area 11. And that management area is roadless. That doesn't allow for road development. It doesn't allow at this point for this sort of developed recreation kind of facility. Going through the revised forest plan process, we may be looking at some new management areas for that area. Now that's a public process. We aren't there yet. So the issue, and not really an issue, but the place where you all can be best engaged in this public dialogue relative to the Forest Service's process is when we get to the forest plan that is in draft format that you can publicly comment on. Right now, we're not in a place that we're accepting comment on this proposal from the general public because we don't have a place for it. We haven't accepted an application from the proponent for the ski area, so thereby we don't have any place to put the comments that you all provide us. So when we get into the NEPA kind of process, if we get that far, that's where we take the comment.
Maggie, can you talk to the issue of a research natural area that exists on top of Carlton Ridge and basically goes down into Mormon Creek? It's about 700 acres, I believe.
Right.
And what has to be done, if anything can be done to eliminate that RNA, or I think that you're kind of predisposed to have to keep it there.
Right. As we understand it,
Can you explain what an RNA is?
yes, I actually know what an RNA is. Can I take this off? Thank you. I'll do the Oprah thing. So, as I understand it, and I think those of us that work at the Lolo Forest, our understanding is a research natural area, in this case the Carlton Ridge Research Natural Area, is set up for the unique features that exist in that area. In that case, it's an alpine larch stand, and those particular unique features are important to us. So we have that area, under the wisdom of the folks that came before us in the previous forest plan, they designated that area special so that it doesn't get any development, and it can only be changed by the chief of the Forest Service. So we, as we understand it, that particular research natural area will be sustained.
Stick around, Maggie.
Now remember, this is not about me, so I'm going to go.
Okay. But you have some of the clarifications that people are looking for. This gentleman right here?
May I make a comment?
Sure.
Not a question. I don't want to embarrass Maggie. Can you hear me? Yeah. The existing forest plan was made in 1979 and 1982, and that was my plan. So what's up there now in the way of zoning, now I'm going to call it zoning instead of allocation, are some management areas that now exist until the Forest Service changes the plan. And under those zonings, this project would not be feasible. It's called Management Area 11 for the bulk of it, which is really a backcountry recreation, non-roaded, non-motorized, dispersed recreation allocation zoning, okay? I want to tell you how that came about. When we were doing the forest plan, we sensed throughout the community, what do you want on your land? And one of the things the people in Montana and this part of the world said is, we'd like a kind of land that sets between wilderness and development. That's backcountry where we can recreate by walking, hiking, doing those things. So we set this model in effect, and throughout the forest, we're doing all the roadless areas. Now this is inventoried roadless areas. We picked, I think it's 160,000 acres, Maggie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of which we said these are the best for that kind of use. That's how your mountain is now zoned. Some to go into the wilderness, an addition to the wilderness, excuse me, some in this backcountry roaded capacity, and some in the NRA, or the Recreation Research Naturalist. By the way, if we had not done that, we would have classified most of those lands in a visual quality standard of retention or near retention, which would mean no roads could be visible, no clear cuts, no nothing. That's probably how it would have been if we hadn't put it into this classification. Now, the plan, that was a contract with you people. That isn't just something Maggie can change. They can't change that without revising the forest plan, which they're in the process. If you want that to stay, you have to tell them. You have to tell them you want to keep the status quo. Because if you don't, other influences may affect how you do that. Now, I've got enough time to say one more thing.
You have a lot of standing in this community, so.
How do you do that? I'm going to let Maggie answer that. She will. But let me touch on just a couple of other things. Take this threat as real.
Yes.
Just because you see some things that say it won't happen, don't believe it. Some of the most powerful interests on national forests nationally are ski areas. There's been many people working for the Forest Service with their careers threatened when they cross the ski area. Frankly, they're tougher than the timber industry and the mining industry and the others. But in the ski areas, they have so much power, so much money. Decisions have gone clear to the White House on this. If you don't want this to change, you're going to have to. And if you want to, Mario did a great job of showing the forest. But if you want to know what that alpine forest looks like, that alpine large forest, it's about twice the height of this ceiling. It's about 30 or 40 stems per acre, an open grown, gnarled, old, there's 2 or 3 human beings, and it's all covered underneath with heather and low vegetation about like this. It's one of the most beautiful spots you'll ever see. Nothing up this fall. I recommend you go. I go every fall when the trees are
Thank you very much. I want to make sure that all of you know this yellow sheet in the back. This tells you what you need to do. This is our action alert. It gives you details, who to write, what about, and I appreciate the comment about this is serious. We have to take this seriously. The gentleman. Thank you very much. Somebody doing some research on his own about the previous proposals that are a little different. When that proposal was in place, the developer didn't have the water rights that Mr. McClay is bringing to the table. So there's this is a difference, but it's the same group doing the same kind of survey. Yes.
Well, the question is, what about the workers who can't afford to live near the area if they end up in Missoula and get exported here and have impacts on housing and other kinds of infrastructure costs? And how do the local decision makers on city council and county commissioners look on that? And basically, my understanding of the application process, because so much of the project involves water rights, roads, and other infrastructure issues, they will be approaching the county commissioners for approval and the necessary kinds of legal and technical authorization to do the things they want to do. Basically, I guess there's two kinds of things to think about in terms of the workers. They can't afford to live near the area, they're going to live farther away, so we're going to see more traffic and sprawl. The other part of it too is that in a lot of these resort real estate developments, workers are not from the area. They come from outside the area. Some of them are undocumented workers in the Colorado resorts. Some of them are workers from Europe. Some of them are workers from elsewhere in the U.S. So even though a job number is thrown out as X number of jobs, issue number one, what kind of jobs are they? Issue number two, who are they for? And it's not a guarantee that they're A, good jobs, or B, that they're going to be jobs for local workers. And one other comment too that I'd like to make, there are questions about land and the possibility of taking that private land and putting it into some alternative uses. And there's a lot of speculation right now about the land values and rumors floating around as to how those small parcels of land may be sold for enormous sums of money. And right now, that a lot of that speculation, and I guess an even higher level of speculation is, what is the money behind all of this? Because the project we're talking about is big time. And if you're talking about a Whistler or an Aspen, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. There are financial organizations and corporations that have that kind of money sitting around, and they want to find good places to park it to earn a return. So we don't know exactly whether it's one of the major big three ski industry operations such as IntraWest. We don't know that. But it would seem from the scale being proposed, from the out-of-state team that's being assembled that isn't doing this pro bono, that in fact there are some very big bucks behind this. So as the gentleman said earlier, as a serious threat and something that may have an economic life of its own in terms of influence in the halls of power, this is a very real proposition to keep in mind.
Since we have all these people here, I'd like to see a show of hands of how many of you do not support this development, so that Maggie with Lolo National Forest can see how many of us oppose it.
Straw vote? I'm going to count for the next hour. The other part of it, though, as Daphne mentioned, is writing letters, particularly to Senator Burns, Senator Baucus. We now have more voting power on this side of the state than on the eastern side of the state. So certain folks in the U.S. Senate are paying a little more attention to us. And definitely, certainly in past actions, such as the Cox property for the open space activities here in the valley, letter writers, such as a lot of us in this room, to Senator Burns and Baucus, we got support there. So it's our voice that we have to get out there to not only the Forest Service, but also the senators and our representatives.
Before I take the next question from the gentleman in blue shirt, I'm going to ask Maggie to come up again to briefly talk about the comment.
Sure. Yeah, Daphne and Joel wanted me to mention just what is it that you all can comment on right now, and how are we going to use the input that you provide, and we certainly don't want you to think that we minimize or diminish the value of your comment anytime. So, like Orville said, it's critical that we hear how you believe your public land should be managed in this next go in the forest plan. The fact that we are in a little bit of a kind of a state of flux because we have new planning regs that have just come out. So internally, we're trying to determine if we're going to stay with the previous regulations or go with these new ones. But that doesn't mean that we can't hear from you relative to how you think certain places that are now designated certain types of management areas should be managed. If you prefer the type of management area that currently exists, let us hear about that. We can utilize those comments anytime. It's most useful to us when we get, in terms of the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act allows us to accept comment in certain formal fashion because we're in a place after the draft EIS comes out that we know how to accumulate the comments, take them in, consider them, and respond back to them. We'll take comment on the forest plan anytime, and we will take comment relative to this proposal anytime. What I meant earlier when I said that we don't really know what to do with it, it's kind of true. We know that we're interested in it. We read the comments. We've read every one that we've gotten so far from folks in the Missoula community and the surrounding area.
Other questions?
I mean, I haven't read the complaint, and I'm not going to necessarily comment on the litigation, but that does raise some issues with there's an abandonment statute in Montana, meaning, you know, if you haven't used water rights for at least a 10-year period, then the burden shifts for you to prove that you haven't abandoned them. And in this case, if these water rights have laid abandoned for over 10 years, you know, there might be some issues like, hey, they're not even available for use. And those would be some of the claims that could be asserted to oppose their reinitiating those.
Oh, somebody in the back's had his hand up many times. Then I'll get to you, Julie.
Yeah, I mean, that's the complexity of water rights. Again, you know, there's a historic period of use that comes with each water right, you know, and it's very difficult, if not possible, to even change that to winter. So they have a high hurdle to even get past to do that. And then in order, they have to show, you know, no adverse impacts as a result of those changes, which is they have to come forth with a lot of evidence. And again, they're going to have to come forward with these surface and groundwater reports to document these impacts. So, I mean, those are real concerns, and, you know, there needs to be some studies on those issues.
Julie.
I was just wondering if, is all of the development going to be in Missoula County?
The biggest chunk of it is.
The biggest chunk of it is? So,
My question, am I the one?
you're the one to ask the question.
Wow. My question is dealing with Forest Service. Approximately how many personnel are working on this project at the moment?
We've probably got just less than a half a dozen. So very few folks are able to devote a good portion of their time to this. So we've tried to streamline it. We're not in the throes of the actual permit application, and so thereby we are able to work through these initial screening levels to determine if the things that they've proposed to date meet those initial screening levels. And so it's just a couple of folks right now.
Well, question number 2, with all the millions of dollars behind this project, and it's a tremendous sum, are your Forest Service personnel dealing to any degree with these folks who are bound and determined they will get this project through?
I'm not sure what you mean by dealing with.
Well, are you discussing it with them? They're going to lobby you, we know that.
Mm-hmm.
And they will lobby you excessively and continuously.
Well,
This is the way it works.
I understand. It's an emotional argument what you're bringing up, but what we've got is, like I said, it's a very systematic process that we work through, and we work hard to keep that emotion out of it if we can. So no, we have met the people that are working with Mr. McClay, and we work with them on a monthly basis to bring them up to speed with the process and what we expect, and they answer the questions that we ask, and And that's where we're at.
But in the end, the Forest Service makes the final decision.
That's true.
What's the back? With our input, don't ever forget that. So, yeah, you.
Well, I want to just emphasize what the forest supervisor, the former forest supervisor's comment with regard to, and kind of carries on with what you're saying, the level at this, that the decision is going to be made. It should be at the forest service level, but believe me, it's already, the hobnobbing of the politicians on the other side has already started. It's taking place in full force, and we need to be just as active, full force, with those same senators, and just as seriously as he alluded to, because even though we could do everything right and the Forest Service could want to rule in the right direction, it can be overridden the higher it goes, and it's very likely with the powers to be and the money behind it that it could happen. So I think the right impact is true. The writer of Congressmen and senators keep that at the top of our list as well. The other question we have, one of the questions is, a few years back, the Clay sued the Forest Service because of that slide area and the road that was put in that supposedly caused the damage, and they won a fairly substantial settlement, from my understanding, and were successful in closing off access to all the Forest Service land beyond that gate that was put right at the base of the hill. And it was due to public safety.
You're talking about McLean Creek now.
McLean Creek. And it was due to public safety that they were able to close that road. And in this information that we got today in the white paper, it says one of the things that has to be considered in screening this is that they will the project will create a serious and substantial risk to public health and safety. And I guess my question is, if it was such a serious risk that you had to close that area off to begin with, and now there are ski hills and ski towers on that same hillside and that same slide area, wouldn't that pose a more substantial public risk to the people that are going to be using that land? And why all of a sudden, since there's an economic value to me being able to sell this little chunk of land for 10 times what it's worth, because I have the right to the ski area right above it, that becomes a non-existent problem anymore. They can't fix the slide, is my understanding. That's impossible to repair a slide area. I don't know if that's been addressed.
The instability of the soils in that area did come up at the Florence meeting, and the team of engineers said that it was something they would have to work on.
Pick and shovel.
I don't know, is there anything more specific that you want to address on that, Maggie?
Well, I could add that your point about those particular points in the screening levels is exactly what we are in the throes of looking at. So in the first level of screening, there are these 9 criteria. And where we are right now, the proponent needs to show that they can meet all those criteria. And so we're diligent in seeing if those things can be answered when we work through those screening levels.
Kirk, do you have something to?
One of the criteria has to be consistent with the applicable forest plans. It clearly is not, so why do you need anybody working on it?
The question is that
First level of screening?
the first level of screening, it has to meet one of the alternatives.
Has to meet the forest plan in effect right now.
It has to meet the forest plan that is in effect right now, and it doesn't, so, yeah. Why are we working on it?
Kirk, thank you for that question. And I was thinking somebody was going to ask that. That's exactly where we're at right now, to determine whether or not their proposal as it stands can meet the current forest plan management area guidelines. If it doesn't, we can go back and they can change their proposal, or we can determine that it isn't going to meet it. So that is exactly where we are right now, and we don't want to be, we want to make sure that we're diligent in answering that. So that's where we're at.
say there's a new forest plan coming out?
They have submitted a preliminary rough conceptual proposal, but only just recently, right?
Yeah. This notion of a proposal, this is a really, it's in our regulations, in this information that you all may have picked up this evening, the regulations indicate that once we receive a written, very concise proposal from the proponent, then we begin this process. Well, really, the proposal has kind of been an evolving piece of work for us. So initially, a couple months ago when Mr. McClay brought out his conceptual idea, we took that as just a conceptual idea. Well, now we've been going back and forth saying, okay, we need you to answer these questions. And as those questions get answered, so becomes the proposal. So we now are at a place where we are saying we have a preliminary proposal. It isn't a formal kind of rolled out document as the regs might describe it, but you can expect that what we're working with right now is their preliminary proposal.
So what's the new forest plan that's in flux if it doesn't meet the current standard?
The forest plans are, we are mandated to upgrade and revise our forest plans every 10 to 15 years. So the 1987 forest plan was due, and so we are in the process of revising our forest plan along with the Bitterroot and the Flathead National Forests. We are doing that under the current planning regs. Our chief just recently issued new planning regulations, so we've been in the throes of the last year or so working to revise our old forest plan under the old regulations. Just 2-3 weeks ago, the new regulations rolled out. So we have a choice to determine, do we want to go with the new or with the old regulations?
Are the new regulations more relaxed?
The new regulations, in my mind, and I haven't read all of it, so I really don't want to be an expert on it, but I know that once I realize that if we're going to go to the new regs, then I will quickly become an expert. But I do know that we are in the new regs basically call for more collaboration than we've given, it's not a NEPA decision, so it doesn't have an appeal right to it. There are some things that have less stringent type of regulation to it, but allow for more community collaboration. So we're in the throes of trying to figure out which way we're going to go with that, and we hope to know that answer in the next few weeks.
And it's my understanding that each district each forest is allowed to make their own decision about which set of regs, the new ones or the old ones, to follow. I'd like to make sure that people who have questions other than Forest Service process questions get their questions answered. This gentleman here has been... Are there copies of the preliminary proposal available?
No, not
that.
me.
No.
I don't have them.
No.
File under FOIA?
Did he file under the Freedom of Information Act?
These are good questions. To be honest, I'm not sure. I don't know. We've been working with the proponent just in terms of their initial proposal. I suspect that the information they've given us is certainly part of the public record. It's not something that we will be doing a lot of copying of and making available to the public, but I know the proponent has a website. You might be able to go right on their website and get the proposal right from there.
Yep, that's a good idea. In the green hat, the alternatives have been developed over the last year and a half, and has had intense public input. I know lots of people in the room have been involved in that. And if you go to the Forest Service website, they have the alternatives posted. And I think it's alternative A through, how many, about 6 or 7? About 7 alternatives already on the table. If they go with the current regs. It's very complex, and we have to keep on top of it, and probably should be meeting with Maggie about every other day to find out the changes along the road.
You bet. You guys will get real tired of me real quick. I did want to make just one comment, though, that remember when you do, if you do comment now, it is important for us to know that if you want the management areas as they currently exist to remain the same, no matter what leaning you go toward, let us know that. If you want a management area that will include something like a developed area like this in the future forest plan, let us know that. And if you don't, let us know that as well.
So that you know, let's have a show of hands right now. You want to retain what we have. And tomorrow morning, you remember that.
Okay. Now, let's not all put it on Maggie's shoulders and know that we need to get the letters in.
Well, you know, it always feels like a vote is the right way. You know, it's just a democratic kind of a thing. But truly, in the Forest Service, we look for the intent and the heart of the matter. And so the numbers are, although very important, the content and the substance of it, and the guts of what your comment is really important to us. Now, in the public community that we have here in Missoula, and I've said this many times before, we're so lucky that we have people that are interested in the work that we do in the Forest Service and how your public lands are managed. So we're used to getting comment from the public in Missoula on any number of topics. So you can give us that comment. A lot of comment on the same thing will be very important to us. Likewise, the senators, the congressional delegation from Montana, I understand, are very interested in things like this. So it isn't just a Forest Service conversation in my mind. So it's a community kind of a dialogue that can go further.
We do know that Mr. McClay has talked to representatives from our senators. We also know that Senator Burns has asked point blank, what does the community feel about this? Until I know that, I'm not going to make up my mind. So that tells us something, doesn't it? We have to start letting him know, because he needs us in the next election.
He's not going to run.
Oh.
Those claims he is.
Right.
You said that
Yeah.
before.
I've got a two-part question.
Yeah.
One is there's various rumors floating around town, as I'm sure we've all heard. I don't know which ones have merit and which ones don't.
I'll repeat the question. That there are a lot of rumors running around town that he's not sure if there's merit or not.
Well, my two-part question deals with this. One, I've been there in the winter a few times, and it is a real gnarly area. There's some major slide paths up there. It's hard to access that peak until you get into May, when the road opens up on May 15th and you can drive. But in terms of a physical barrier, I've heard rumor of that there would have to be some type of physical barrier to have to construct to keep the average skiers from jumping back into the wilderness area and Little St. Joe's and all of that. I was wondering if anybody knows if that has merit to it. And B, I mean, there's going to have to be some major explosive work done up there as well.
For avalanche control. The point was that it's a very difficult area to access now. And if this ski resort goes, would there have to be some kind of barrier to keep people out of the wilderness area because they're not allowed to go there? I think that the barrier idea was sort of jokingly put forward. And I have never heard of a ski resort that has erected a barrier for the wilderness area. People go into them anyway, and unfortunately often don't come out. Yeah.
Has there been a more recent recreation management feasibility study done since the last one, say, in the past 2 years?
Has there been a recreation study, feasibility study in the last, since the 80s?
Yeah.
Since the last one? Not that we have turned up.
And why not?
Because nobody's put a proposal on the table, probably. That's probably what kicks the process into place. We need to wrap up because it is 9 o'clock. We only have the room until 9. And I really appreciate you all coming, the interest, the energy, the desire to keep the Lolo Peak as we know it is wonderful. Don't forget, pick up all the information and join Friends of Lolo Peak, and you'll get on an email list. Thank you.
Everybody has to go.